Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to Cave the Cross Apologetics. I'm Patrick.
I'm Tony.
And we're helping you get through Nancy Pearcey's book, Finding Truth. And we're here finishing up her fourth principle in her 5 principles of unmasking atheism, secularism, and other God substitutes. And we're internally critiquing different worldviews that attempt to explain the entirety of the universe, of everything. And we're showing that when a competing worldview from the Christian worldview attempts to supplant God as his rightful position, it becomes an idol, and that idol reduces humanity. It reduces truth claims, and here we're saying that when applied to themselves, these competing truth claims fail under their own standard, that they commit suicide. And so we got done with the physicals, the materialists, the people that believe that there's only physical things out in the world. And we've shown them to be inconsistent and therefore self-defeating. And now we're moving to the things of the mind, the things in the upper part of the attic that Nancy Pearcey and Francis Schaeffer have talked about before. So we're gonna critique postmodernism.
She calls this section Postmodern Prison. And so she asks, okay, so we just finished materialism. What about postmodernism? What happens to it if we apply the test of self-referential absurdity? What if we apply its truth claims to itself? What happens to it, right? She says, as we saw earlier, postmodernism absolutizes the social group. It claims that individuals are largely constituted by their membership in a community. When we absorb the language of our community, in the process, we absorb its worldview, the storyline or narrative it invokes to explain the world. That's its worldview, its storyline, its narrative. Thus, when we speak, we are only externalizing a storyline that we have first assimilated from the larger community that we're a part of. So that's what's going on, right? She says postmodernists express this idea using paradoxical statements like language speaks us rather than we speak language. Whoa, right? That's deep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The point is that we cannot even think about apart from language that we've assimilated from our community. Nietzsche, with his typical flair, wrote that we are trapped in the prison house of language. Right? That's his echoes of Neo trapped in the prison of his mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because worldviews are transmitted through language, postmodernists use the metaphor of language games. Right now, this comes out of again, an early 20th century philosopher, Wittgenstein, talked about language games. So they picked this up, right? Just as a baseball and football are games with virtually no rules in common, right? In other words, what makes baseball, and football both games? I mean, they're totally different. Virtually no, about the only thing is you keep score, right? But other than that, the score's kept differently. You score differently, So if I play catch out in the yard, is that a game? Yes, probably, What about board games? Why are they games, right? Do you keep score with all board games? So what is it, And so that's the issue that Nietzsche was trying to help us to see with regard to this idea of language games, right? So football and baseball are virtually no rules in common. So worldviews are said to be language games, each with its own unique set of rules. But it's still a worldview. Mm-hmm. It's made up of this language game. Each community has its own language game for making sense of the world. What was called, but there is no universal narrative, no meta-narrative, right, that is valid for all human beings at all times. Oops, be careful there. What do we see here, right? There's no meta-narrative that is valid for all human beings at all times.
Ooh. Is that American?
I don't know if they want to say that, right?
This applies to everybody.
Yeah. There's no possibility that language games can be unified or totalized in a meta discourse. Now notice, she says, yet what reason can be given for us to accept this particular theory? Isn't the theory's own view just one more language game like all the rest of them, right? Isn't then anybody who holds this theory trapped in the prison house of his own language, just like everyone else? And why should we pay attention to him at all, right? So most postmodernism, she tells us, is an example of what is called a performative contradiction, right? Which means that a position is contradicted in the very act of asserting it. So a performative says that language, when you assert something, there's a performance that's going on. For instance, language does something. So, there I am standing with my my wife in front of the church. The minister says, all of these things. I say I do, she says I do, and here comes the performative. I now pronounce you man and wife. So what has he done with his language? Well, he's accomplished something, right? He's performed something. So that's the idea of a performative. And so postmodernism, she says, an example of a performative contradiction, which means that a position is contradicted by the very act of asserting it, right? Everyday examples of performative contradictions, including things like cannot speak English, or I do not exist, to make the statement I must exist, right? So when a postmodernist asserts that there is no universal valid truth, he is implicitly claiming that his own assertion is universally valid and true. Right. And he can't say that, right? To make the statement, he has to occupy the transcendental position that the postmodernists say doesn't exist. Thus, every time a postmodernist states his position, he contradicts it. Position is self-refuting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So postmodernism falls to the same critique as materialism does. Mm-hmm. When you apply it to itself, it crashes and burns.
Right. And we have offshoots of when postmodernism thought is applied to things like literary theory. It gives rise to what's called Deconstructionism. So again, postmodernism, individuals are constituted by their membership within a community. That's where it is. You almost have a loss of the personal. Your
personal identity.
You're just part of the collective. You're part of the group. You're part of and that
makes you who you are because you're part of the group, right?
Yeah, right. And it's really hard to see where those lines are drawn, but And
it affects all that you think and all that you say because you're only repeating what the rest of the group, and thinking what the rest of the group has kind of, you've immersed into, has you've assimilated, right? It's the Borg collective.
Right. Yeah. And so you have literary critics like Roland Barthes who have say that pieces of writing is merely a tissue of quotations absorbed from the surrounding culture. He's best known for his slogan, "The death of the author," by which he means the death of the very concept of individual creativity. So the writers are just like these bards or these shamans who of old have taken the stories of their clan or their tribe or their community and spun them a different way or utilized them to apply to a particular person and the kind of everything is the Odyssey, there's man versus nature, man versus man, man versus God, and Homer's Odyssey. Everything is just derived from that, and so any story that attempts to communicate a story function is ultimately just a kind of this going back to a Western civilization type storyteller, and it's not something that they've come up with. They're just reforming it in their own way.
Because the author's dead.
Yeah, texts have no authors. Moreover, we all belong to a variety of communities based on attributes such as race, class, gender, ethnicity, and sexual identity, all with conflicting outlooks and interests. As a result, every author will unconsciously reflect conflicting social messages. For Barthes, a text is a mix in which a variety of writings, none of them original, blend and clash. So you have no new stories, and the ones that are made up, they're conflicting with each other because we all have we're all part of different groups. The goal of
and there's none that are original. That's kind of an interesting, right? Saying none of them are original. So his isn't. There's the fact that I belong to a particular race or class or gender. The gender is not original. I'm not sure where it's always been. I guess it's eternal. Yeah. The eternal ethnicity, the eternal self-identity, because none of it is original.
And the stories are eternal. At some point, you have to realize that and I know we're getting a little further here, but that the community, the collective, the group is just made up of individuals, and individuals act. It's like saying that fashion. I wear these clothes because they're fashionable. Well, who made them fashionable? Well, the community did. You're wearing the style that you are. Our hair is the way they are. You look at the 70s and you're like, oh, zoot suits. Where did zoot suits come from? That's just the community, the collective. Well, no, individuals act, and individuals grew into a community who all wore zoot suits. And so that's where these ideas come from. They come from individuals, but that's not what they're trying to do here. So Barth's critique is that is saying that the goal of the literary critic, the person who
deconstructs,
who deconstructs the written word, the goal is to dig beneath the surface of the text to excavate and disentangle those clashing meanings. This is called deconstruction of the text, hence the term deconstructionism. Well, okay, what happens when we apply the theory to itself? As soon as deconstructionists get in the business of providing reasons, they are performing in the business of making claims and thus are subject to their own critique. What happens if we subject Barth's views to his own critique? We have to conclude that he, too, is merely a mouthpiece for social forces such as race, class, and gender. His own writings do not offer original or creative insights, but are mere collages of conflicting quotations absorbed unconsciously from the communities which he belongs. The death of the author must include Barth himself. The death of the author is suicide. He
just killed himself.
Oh, man.
Wow. Talking about a performative utterance, right?
Yes.
A performative contradiction, right?
Yeah.
All writing means the death of the author. So his writing means his death.
And we've seen this idea of like class conflict and critical race theory and the social justice movement is this attempt to say, you have the oppressor and the oppressed. And these ideas seem to be only taking place in kind of a critique of the uncivilized world that you have to be more high-minded in order to rise above this, but you never take that critique upon itself.
Yeah. It's amazing.
In practice, the only way deconstructionists can function is to tacitly exempt themselves from critique that they apply to everyone else. It's such an elitist idea. This is elitism.
The angelic view, the God's eye view, everybody but me view.
Yes.
Right?
And not just me, but my writings, my words, my very words have a special meaning that
transcends all of the rest of the reality.
If this isn't biblical language through and through, this is revelation. This is
that's
an idea.
Right.
This is amazing stuff. Ironically, postmodernists contradict their own view every time they write a book or an article. Deconstructionists hope their own work will be treated as a serious contribution from the creative mind, not merely a replay of cultural messages. Why do we like some movies better than others? Why do we say, oh, I haven't seen that before? Why are we always saying, oh, I wish a movie wouldn't be made from a comic book or a book or something else out there? When someone's like, oh, that just came out of nowhere. Oh, that's interesting. It may not be the greatest movie, but you're like, hey, at least I haven't read that before. At least I haven't seen that before. Okay. Theologian Mark C. Taylor, himself a postmodernist, don't know how he's a postmodernist and a theologian, but he explains the death of the author was an inevitable result of the death of God. The death of God was the disappearance of the author, capital A, who had inscribed absolute truth and
univocal.
Yeah, univocal, meaning in world history. And because humans are made in the image of God, Taylor concludes that the death of God implies the disappearance of the author. For if there is no creator, then humans do not have dignity of being sub-creators. They are merely products of social, historical forces.
What a situation that we find ourselves in.
And again, part of that's true, but it's not the whole. And they're trying to say, this is the whole. All of this is like this part, where that part can be true, but...
Yeah, we are social creatures, right? We are, to a certain extent, a product of our communities and the various identities in our communities. Yes, we are, but we're more than that.
Yeah.
We're created in the image of a transcendent creator.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no assumption that, like language. So all the words that we're saying have always been said or have always existed in our minds. The evolution of language has never happened, or that evolution goes back to the first words where all language comes from everything. Well, I think that's a biblical idea right there, and we probably don't want to say that. Or just coming up with new words. The word cool or meme or computer or robot. I mean, those are words that we find enter into the lexicon and then become part of the community from individuals. So, it's wrong, but it's because they're taking the part and applying it to the whole.
Yeah. All right, so the next section is entitled Postmodernism and Terror. She says, to understand the source of postmodernism, we must place its founders in their historical context, right? Why were they so opposed to grand meta-narratives? She says the answer is that they viewed them as the source of brutal, oppressive political regimes, right? Most of the founders of postmodernism were Europeans who had witnessed firsthand history's bloodiest and most oppressive political systems, Nazism and communism. And she says that as we saw in Principle 2, both of these systems center on a single principle, race Nazism or economic class communism. Both embrace a grand vision of history moving inexorably towards some ideal society. And both became totalitarian, using their utopian visions to justify secret police and death camps. And so she's suggesting here that postmodernism was a reaction to this type of thing, right? They saw this, obviously that they understood this was terrible, and so they reacted to these types of things. After World War II, many European thinkers had suffered under these oppressive regimes, decided that the source of totalitarianism lie in totalizing meta-narratives. So they suggested the source of these things. And so by totalizing, they meant a worldview that focuses on a single dimension of human experience, elevating it to a false absolute and subordinating everything else into its category, right? So when a one-dimensional totalizing worldview gains political power, those who disagree will be marginalized, oppressed, left out, silenced, dominated, co-opted, controlled, coerced, and all kinds of things if you disagree. They will be stigmatized as different, perceived as the other, quote, locked up in concentration camps and so forth, all must bow to the state-enforced idol or be burned in the furnace of opposition. Right? That sound like any regimes that we know of today.
Maybe.
She says, postmodernism insight into the dynamics of false absolutes sound familiar. We've been making a similar critique showing how idols are created when some part of the creation is absolutized. So they get a portion of it right. Clearly, you don't want to absolutize one thing or one portion of the creation. She says, but the mistake postmodernists made was to think that the source of the problem was a commitment to any comprehensive truth. So in other words, in order not to absolutize one particular idea, they blame it on truth and throw out truth.
Right.
That's the idea here, right? She says, in the postmodern condition, Lyotard says the conviction that there is only one truth, the whole truth, leads inevitably to terror. The 19th and 20th centuries have given us as much terror as we can take. We have paid a high price for the nostalgia of the whole and the one truth. So there's no whole and one truth. There are many meta-narratives, and so we throw out the whole concept of something that's absolutely true.
Right. And again, like you said, there's a point to that. If you radicalize the people who say, it's this truth, and there are implications to you, your family, because of that, then you may have radicalization. Even in, let's assume that it is true. Even if it is true, radicalization of people. And so this is attempting to say, there's no such thing as this overarching one truth. There should be many truths, but there you just come into conflict between class and people and race and different social structures within the communities.
Yeah. So they create their own conflicts, right? And they create their own, and so it's really the strongest survives, or the strongest rules, or that sort of thing. She says postmodernists conclude that the way to challenge claims to absolute power was to challenge claims to absolute truth. So we can get rid of absolute power by challenging claims to absolute truth. There is no absolute truth, so that way we can challenge absolute power. As Eagleton puts it, postmodernism, quote, makes the mistake of supposing that all passionate conviction is incessantly dogmatic and will end up with the gulag, right? But why is this a mistake? Well, because it's self-refuting. By rejecting any universal truth, postmodernism undercuts its own claim to truth. If there isn't any truth, then what you're saying isn't true either. Mm-hmm. Oops.
Yeah.
Right? Moreover, without some universal standard of justice, there's no way to stand against injustice and there's no ultimate standard of what true justice is. Then how do you stand against any actions against people that we may think is injustice, right? As one philosopher writes, without timeless and universal moral principles, it seems that we cannot criticize the values of different cultures or times, no matter how repugnant they may seem. She says, think of it this way. If all claims can be deconstructed, then what about the claim that the rich should not oppress the poor, or that we should resist bigotry and racism? These claims, too, can be deconstructed. Thus, the postmodernism may appear to be radical, but it is, in fact, unable to offer resistance to the political status quo. Yeah. Lived out consistently, postmodernism, she tells us, leads to complicity with evil and injustice.
Right. Yeah. So the oppressing of the poor. Well, that's just how that society has collected itself into its language and social structure and all that. So who are you to say that shouldn't be done? Why?
And there's no absolute truth with regard to whether or not you should do it, right? Whether or not it's good or bad, right? There are no universal standards, right? It's each society, each community, each culture determines for itself. And that gets us right back into the same problem that they were attempting to avoid, right? Now, instead of an individual, it's the community or the collective ideas of the community that are oppressing and absolutizing particular ideas.
Yeah, and that leads right into the next portion where the theory of also leads to the coercive suppression of diversity. But it seems odd because that's the call. So you have terror and war and all this stuff because there's only one truth. So we get rid of truth, and all these different things pop up, and we should want that diversity. We should want more of those things popping up because then everyone won't fight with each other because there's not just one way to do things. It may sound ironic first, but it was postmodernists that made diversity such a potent buzzword in the first place. Postmodernists decided that if totalitarianism results from totalizing meta-narratives, again, like the truth, that there's one truth, then the way to prevent concentration of power is to maintain a variety of mini narratives. By celebrating the diversity of communities, their language games, postmodernists hope to avoid coercion of the society organized by a single absolutized category. In practice, however, only select groups are singled out to represent diversity, certified victim groups based on things like race, class, gender, ethnic group, and sexual identity. And we see that in the political structure today. Be diverse. Don't exclude everybody. Oh, but if you're conservative, if you're libertarian, if you are against abortion, you don't have a place within our diverse
or if you have
ideas.
Theological views, right?
Right.
Those are out. Yeah.
Theological views that tell me that I'm doing things wrong. Oh, yeah, I can't have that. Rarely is there a push for intellectual or political or theological diversity when those views run counter to postmodernism, or again, whatever the prevailing narrative, whatever the political structure is, whatever the race or category is. And so analysis of problems in typical is derived from Marx. Some groups said to be victimized and oppressed, and the path to liberation is to revolt against oppressors, often through political activism. And that just goes back to Orwell's Animal Farm, everyone is suppressed, but there are people that are more suppressed than others. So everyone's equal, but there are some pigs that are more equal than others. And instead, we tend to apply Marxist criticism or feminist criticism or whatever the critics' preferred theory is. We don't deal with issues of aesthetics such as style, structure, and composition. Literary study helps students decide which side of the world historical class struggle they take, the side of the owners of the means production or the side of the workers. This and only this is the real question in textual literacy. And you see that in a lot of the social sciences. Politically correct university courses are not liberating students to think for themselves. They're turning students into cadres of self-absorbed reactionaries ready to take orders from the faddist theorists of the moment. So those that are the most popular, because that's speaking to the most amount of groups. But that in itself is a collectivist mindset. It's saying, oh, this is really popular. Well, how is it popular? Oh, because a lot of people view it as such. Well, okay, I thought we were about the oppressors, so shouldn't we always be on the side of the oppressed, those things that aren't popular? Well, then that becomes a popular statement. So again, this self-refutation.
You're caught in a little circle.
Yeah, right. I don't know how to get out of this, and I'm just talking about what.
If you reject it and everybody else rejects it, now it becomes the popular thing.
Yeah.
Oh, so you gotta, what do you do? Right?
Wear my hat backwards. Now everyone's wearing their hat backwards. Now I wear it upside down. The attraction of postmodern criticism, he writes, is that it allows you to pose as a superior thinker who humiliates naive believers by deconstructing their beliefs. You are always right. Their behavior is entirely determined by the actions of powerful causalities coming from objective reality they don't see, but that you alone can see. Oh, well.
So this guy literally wrote this. Only he or the folks who agree with him can see this.
Yeah, Bruno Latour. Postmodernists began with the noble goal of unmasking the implicit imperialism of modernist worldviews. Okay, good. But ironically, it has become imperialist, insisting that postmodernism and postmodernists alone have the ability to unmask everyone else's underlying interests and motives. Everything is the result of racism. Everything is racism. Everything is because you're rich. Everything is because of this. Okay, but then is that also? Is it because you have that social standing to say that? Well, yes. Okay, so no one should listen to you then, right? That's what the call is for. An article in The Atlantic observes that political correctness morphed into a tyranny of speech codes, sensitivity training, and book banning. Sounds real diverse. That doesn't sound at all like what the rally cries against certain political and social movements of the 1940s were. The drive for diversity, which was supposed to be the safeguard for liberty, has itself become coercive and homogenizing. Diversity has become a code word for a new form of tyranny.
And so she asked the question in this next section, how can we prepare young people for the postmodernist theories they will encounter in the university, in the classroom, and that sort of thing?
Yeah, and I would say at the point of this book being read, that's I think where they were predominantly located. But now, I mean, now it's
pervasive throughout all society.
It's in the culture. It's in the culture, and there's a quote from someone that says, politics is downstream from culture. So it becomes cultural, then it becomes political, then it becomes normal. And then you have to, it's either pervasive in all three, the universities, the culture, and then the political, or there's a revolution that happens because of it. And unfortunately, it seems, I don't know, once you have, there are no men and women, that there's no thing as truth. I don't know how you rebel against that other than to go back and start all over.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
There is truth. There are, man. There are.
Yeah.
So again, you're caught in that circle. And then once you start that, then you have to rebel against that. Right. And there you go, right? She says, like every worldview, postmodernism offers genuine insights, especially in the critique of modernism. Enlightenment held an exalted view of the autonomous individual in possession of disembodied reason, right? Which supposedly lifted him above his tiny slot in time and space to live a timeless, objective truth based on reason. By contrast, postmodernism insists that knowledge is always contextual. Persons are not disembodied consciousness. They are physical beings situated within communities, and their worldviews are colored by cultural conditions, economic interests, and power relations. She says, yet in reacting against the Enlightenment, postmodernism falls off the horse on the other side. Right? It reduces the individual to a patchwork of historical and social forces with no stable personal identity. And the reason goes back to Hegel's historicism, which he talked about earlier, the implication that there's no such thing as human nature, so no stable, ideal blueprint for what it means to be human, no universal standard to tell us who we are and how to fulfill our true nature. And so, right, we've lost ourself, our individualization, right? As the existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre puts it, there's no human nature, but because there is no God to have a concept. Right? Essence precedes existence, is what he said. Existence precedes essence, is what he claimed. Since God is dead, we don't have any essence. We don't have any purpose. We just find ourselves in existence. And so now we have to create our own essence, our own purpose. And so he said, existence precedes essence. Yeah. And so as a result, now everything I do is creating humanity, right? Everything I do, because I'm adding to the essence of humanity. And so we find ourselves in despair and forlornment and all that kind of thing. So that was kind of Sartre, what he was getting at here. He says, just as species are constantly changing and evolving, so individuals must leave behind all stable standards and immerse themselves in the ceaseless flux of life, constantly creating and recreating themselves. She says, to use postmodern terms, the self is fluid and fragmented. Michel Foucault says his goal is the disassociation of the self by showing that our sense of being a coherent self is in reality an empty synthesis of past events. So what exactly does this mean? Well, one philosopher explained that for Foucault, our identities are fictionally anyway. Each of us is plural, right? And so we have all these various forces pulling us in many directions. But notice, if our identities are fictional, then who is Foucault? And who is really speaking in his writing? Right? When a postmodernist states that it's impossible to attain objectivity, is that an objective statement? The theory itself undercuts its claims. Right? It commits suicide. Yeah. Right?
There are no individuals in postmodernism, but I, as an individual, am saying that. Right?
Yeah.
So I'm
no universal truth in postmodernism.
Yeah. Or again, it's
that is a universal truth.
It's claim. That Borg type thinking, but there's no actuality based on that because, yes, the Borg is one thing, but you still have we are not the Borg. We haven't been assimilated into that, and we have these competing communities that we're a part of, and so you would think that and it's not just race, sex, class, sexual orientation. I mean, it could be I play Dungeons and Dragons and you don't, and that's a class apart.
So like the Dungeons and Dragons group, right, or a collective, or
PC
society.
and Apple. I mean, all these things are social constructs, just like race, class, sex, and everything else, right? Well, okay, why not drill down into when you're the only class person of all those things? It's not just yes, we're both males, but we're both of different age groups, and so does that put us in the same one or different ones? Well, I think
so. Your idea of social construction is socially constructed.
Yeah, right.
Okay,
Yeah.
So why should it matter over anybody else's idea?
Right.
Right.
But then to say the opposite, that we're only individuals, I'm talking to you, and therefore we're part of a community. We have a common language. We're wanting to communicate with each other. I don't communicate with the ant. I don't have the ability to. I wouldn't want to because they're ants. Gross. And so we're not part of a social class. You wouldn't say the ant and the human are social beings. Some might, but those are weird biologists. And so I like the narrative of falling off the other side of the horse. It's the parts are on the side. The whole is staying on the saddle. And so yes, communities, and yes, individuals, but not only communities, and not only classes or communities.
Yeah. So they're getting rid of themselves, right? She says, moreover, this runs contrary to human experience. Each of us experiences the inescapable, irresistible sense of being a coherent self, an active center of consciousness, not merely a passive locus of, colliding social forces. Even as we undergo life changes, right? Growing older and that sort of thing. We're aware of an enduring core personality. The universality of this first-person awareness, even among those whose worldview denies it, is a clue that it is intrinsic to human experience. We are so constructed that we cannot live consistently on the basis of the postmodernist radical reductionism. And neither can they. The truth of general revelation, she says, cannot be ultimately suppressed. Again, they run into the wall. Right.
So the problem of how to balance our individual identity with our membership in communities is a perennial question known in philosophy as the one and the many, or unity and diversity. And this is a big question, right? In philosophy, the one and the many issue.
Not as much as it has been in the past.
Okay, so things have gotten figured out since.
Well, no, not really.
we just with it?
Well, we just don't do a lot of metaphysics anymore.
Oh, okay. So we've shoved it off on the in the attic. And right, yeah. So unfortunately, Christianity offers an answers that is surprising and unique. It teaches the human race was created in the image of God, who is a triunity, three persons, so intimately related as to constitute one Godhead. God's own nature consists in reciprocal love and communications among the persons of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit, but the one and the many, both individually and relationship, exist within the divine nature. So
the Trinity resolves and solves this particular one and many problem. Right? Yeah. And unity and diversity. We have it in the Trinity.
I think Scott Oliphant would probably like this chapter because his covenantal apologetics seems to want to focus a lot on Trinity responses like this. The perfect balance of unity and diversity within the Trinity offers a model for human social life and a solution to the opposing poles of postmodernism and modernism. Against postmodernist dissolution of the self, the Trinity implies the dignity of the individual self, just as each person within the Trinity is distinct and plays a unique role in the drama of salvation, so individual persons have a unique identity and purpose. And she goes on to list a lot, and I would actually not want to dive deeper into this portion, but because I would essentially be reading it, because I think she offers a lot of good works here. So at least for our books, it starts on page 209 and goes to 212. But Christianity agrees with postmodernist critique of the Enlightenment notion of disembodied consciousness, and goes on to explain that Christianity refuses to reduce individuals to their communities, as postmodernists does, and Christians are reborn into redeemed communities that transcend all natural communities. So again, the church, the Trinity, the Godhead, these views produce a wonderful balance in practice. Within the church, diversity based on physical origins are kind of done away with, but they're also celebrated. And remarkably, atheist Marxist philosopher has written movingly of the gospel's liberating legacy. The church itself is intended to be a powerful apologetic, a visible, living expression of of the Bible's balanced view. Every local church is a letter from Christ, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God. Francis Schaeffer calls the visible manifestation of love among Christians the final apologetic, the single most likely to attract the attention of a jaded world.
They'll know we are Christians by our love, right? That's the apologetic.
And again, I briefly walked through there because when I was reading it, I'm like, if I'm going to highlight things to point out here, I'm just going to start underlining all of it, and then you reverse highlight and you highlight only the things you don't want to highlight.
So in this last portion, what she does is she considers the good of each of these various theories and shows how Christianity envelops all of them together.
Right. Again,
that's really what she does.
Because they're reducing the whole to the part and saying this is what everything is. And while that's true, there is a part that is true. It's not representative of the whole, and so Christianity then speaks both to the part and to the whole. It's trying to put you on the saddle and keep you there. It's trying to put you on the train tracks and keep you down there.
That's right, yeah, and keep you there, right? Yeah. So materialism, she says, had great respect for the material world. The physical universe is not just a product of chance, though. The earth is not a rock spinning through empty space with no higher purpose or meaning. Instead, the physical universe was brought into being by a God of love and beauty, and it's a product of plan and design. So there, you have both and. Yes, it is a physical universe, but it's also more than that.
Right.
And it has purpose, it has design, and that sort of thing. Empiricism. To counter empiricism, Christians show that biblical worldview offers a better basis for trusting our senses. The flaw in empiricism is that we cannot give any guarantee that we perceive through the senses is true. Right? In other words, how do I know that the chair is there? Well, only by my senses. All right. Well, how can I trust my senses that is a chair? So that's the problem. She says, we can't stand outside of our head to gain an independent vantage of what we're perceiving. So the only adequate basis for confidence in sensory knowledge is the biblical teaching that a creator designed our sensory apparatus to function reliably in the world he created. And so she does this with rationalism, right? She says that we can show that Christianity honors human rationalism as part of the image of God, right? But we're more than just rational, we're loving creatures as well. And postmodernism. To counter postmodernism, she says Christianity offers an even more radical insight into contingencies of human knowledge. Postmodernism reduced knowledge claims to expression of interests and power based on race, class, gender, ethnicity, and that sort of thing. But the biblical teaching on idols cuts through much deeper, right? The Bible teaches that the overriding factor in the choices we make is our commitment to a concept of the divine, right? In other words, your idol or your true God, true and the living God. Our lives are shaped by the God we worship rather than whether the God of the Bible or some substitute. So she says in concluding, in every area, Christianity encompasses valid insights of the other worldviews while avoiding their weaknesses. So Christianity is so attractive to atheists. The atheists keep reaching over and borrowing them, which was the point we made earlier. And because it's so attractive, it puts all of them together and they work together as a whole, as opposed to this reductionistic idea.
Right. Yeah, they can't help it. They're made in the image of God. They do these things because they can't divorce themselves away from that. They're able to be an enemy of God. They're able to deny. They're able to replace with an idol. But ultimately, God is even above the idols, and so it's just incorrect thinking and worship to replace or to attempt to replace God with an
To
idol.
reduce, yeah.
Yeah, and so
do the
that's
reduction.
when you run into trouble, and that's the great part of this fourth point of an internal critique. It's one thing to say Christianity is wrong on how the universe came to be. Okay, fine. There's conversations to be had within that, but then okay, so how are we? How did we come to be? How are we existing? How do we function? How do we act? What is truth? What is morality? Those are things that
Or doesn't even exist.
those are things that everyone has to put forth in some capacity. You could say I'm still working on this, but okay, let's bring into the arena of ideas and take a look at it. And one of the main ones to do is, can it substantiate its own weight? Christianity can, and so we think that Christianity meets all the principles. It doesn't reduce. It's internally consistent. It talks about what we see in the world.
That's just what we see in the world, yeah.
It gives us the ability to for the intelligibility of knowledge. It allows us to predict things.
Rationalization,
Yeah,
reason.
to know what's moral, what's not. And so there's that. And so can other worldviews do that? And
Without borrowing from Christianity.
well, I mean that's the big one, because at some point you're borrowing so much that you should just call yourself a Christian. No one wants to do that.
Well, what we call them is created in the image of God. Right. That's why they're doing it.
Right.
They're unless they believe in Jesus Christ, obviously they're not Christians, but they are created in the image of God. And that allows them.
Yeah, and so there are implications to being created in the image of God that we should, by our very nature, accept, and accepting Christ is one of those. So that was principle 4. We have one more principle 5, which is also a fun one, and from there there's a concluding chapter that's probably going to be 1 or 2 episodes as well. So we still got a little bit in the book to do. It's not always late to pick up Finding Truth. You can do that in Kindle. You can do it in physical, and you can go through our audio library, Apple, Stitcher, Google Play, iHeartRadio. There's a whole bunch of them that listen on the website, caveofthecross.com. Our blog's there. Do a little writing. Book deals are on there. Patreon, if you want to throw us a few bucks, that's great. And our YouTube channel, where you can see our pretty faces, are available on there as well. So thanks for joining us, and hopefully see you back for the concluding 5th principle.
Yeah. See you next time.